Welcome to the chase. You know, we're all running this race. We're all trying to claim victory in it. In my job, I get to sit down with wealthy people all week long. I hear about their wins, I hear about their losses, and quite frankly, like a bartender, I hear about their heartache. And I don't want you to run that type of race, or at least I want you to succeed at the race that you're running, and I want you to succeed at something that matters. Think about it like this. All the while you're chasing after something that's good, God's chasing you with something great.
Well, hello, I'm Chris McAlpin, your host for The Chase, a biblical money management show that is designed to help you maximize the blessing that God has given you. I mean, you are tremendously blessed. You have resources, you have opportunities, you have a tremendous amount of education available to you. And quite frankly, sometimes that education creates an awful lot of noise that feeds our fears and feeds our biases. And that's what this show is about today, where we continue to dive into behavioral finance. And gosh, if you just look at the news cycle these days, we've got a lot that is causing worries. And so we want to unpack that. So prepare to have your head shrunk a little bit, get a little comfortable on the couch, get cozy with yourself. I want you to get to know yourself a whole lot more during this topic, during this conversation today. We're all emotional beings. We all have personalities. We all have this emotional, this drive to survive. Sometimes we call it a fear or fight response. Do we run away from something? Do we stay with it and go toe to toe and defend ourselves? And money touches a very unique part of this in all of us, because money's very logical. It's math. 2 + 2 = 4, and we feel like we can always kind of figure it out. But it is also what provides for our needs. So it touches this survival instinct that we have. And we use it to define our success, or we use it to define our security. We all are guilty of using it to define our status. And so what starts to happen is that we make money ultimate. And when we do that, it starts to wreck us piece by piece in all kinds of areas in our lives. I love our financial fears and biases. They're all a part of this fiasco. And, every person that I know that is good with money, whether they're in our industry or outside of our industry, they have a really good grasp of who they are. I remember one of our old advisors here, I love Jim Towns. I miss Jim Towns. He passed away a year ago. But I remember we were talking about this with a business coach, and Jim had already spent a career as the CEO of a company that he founded. And he just kind of looked and grinned. He said, I know who I am. And what he meant, this was in a decision-making process, when he said, I know who I am. And he was about 65 when he said that. He knew his emotions. He knew his fears. He knew his biases. He knew how he made decisions. He knew his tendencies towards emotion. He knew how to practice a lot of self-control. And so that's what this show today is about, is to help you know yourself a little bit more. And I've invited Joe McQuaid, a good friend of mine, to come on to the show. Joe is the founder of the Ascent Consulting Group. He's an old vet in the financial services industry. He actually served in the concrete jungle that we call Wall Street. Mm-hmm. He's a husband, a dad, an athlete, an adrenaline junkie. He's climbed at least to Mount Everest's base camp, and it's one of his goals to go a little further. But more importantly, I think more bravely, demonstrating more courage on his part, he's braved lacrosse fields up and down the East Coast. So, Joe, welcome. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Chris, and thanks for having me today. I appreciate this opportunity.
Well, good deal, man. This is one of your favorite topics, and I look forward to diving into it with you. Ladies and gentlemen, I've tried to go on runs with Joe before, but the only way I can keep up with him is taking to some trails that he doesn't know, and then he has to kind of stay with me in the Mississippi woods or he gets lost. But he'll run away from me today in this conversation for sure. But before we get kicked, I want to hear about Everest, or at least I want the listeners to hear about Everest. I've heard all about it, but tell us about Mount Everest.
Yeah, it's we could probably fill the entire podcast talking about Mount Everest, but I'll keep it short. It's just an amazing part of this world. And I don't, we all see the pictures on TV, and we see the documentaries, and all the updates on what's going on in Mount Everest. But unless you're there, I think it's hard to describe just the pure environmental beauty of that entire region. So it's a great place in this world.
So you hiked to base camp, right?
I have. I've gone to base camp. I've reached the top of a couple of peaks around base camp. So I've gotten as high as about 19,000 feet, and I'm actually going back in a month to climb 3 more mountains within the Khumbu region, all of which are over 20,000 feet.
That is awesome. So, all right, one question, and we got to get to our topic. So, what is your number one best memory from that trip?
It was getting to the top of Kalapatar, which is one of the peaks near Mount Everest Base Camp. I didn't really want to go because I was exhausted from the 17-day trek from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp, and we left at around 2:30 in the morning so we could get up there for the sunrise. And the sunrise over Mount Everest from the top of Kalapatar was just breathtaking. And I would have never went if my tent mate was a gentleman from Abu Dhabi. If he didn't look at me in the morning and say, "When else are you going to be able to see the sunrise over Mount Everest?"
That's exactly right. I'm glad he did that. I've heard this. I heard somebody say this one time, and you got to throw the sunrise coming over Mount Everest. No one stands there and looks at God's creation and starts to pull out their resume and say, "Look what I've done in my life."
Right.
You just kind of stand there speechless, I imagine.
Yeah.
It's cool. So cool. So our topic is behavioral finance, understanding our fears, understanding our biases. Joe, why is this so important? Why can't we just throw some money in the markets and be done with it? Right? Come on. Why is this so important?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I think at the end of the day, if you look at the statistics and we look at historical performance in the markets, and now just anytime we speak about stock markets and performance, everybody has different goals. Everybody has different risk characteristics. So some of the comments that I make are more broad comments about overall market performance or about investor behavior, but we do know everybody's different. But I think what happens is if you look at the overall statistics of performance, most investors underperform the markets. And most investors underperform the markets significantly. And I think that's purely because of behavior. And it's purely because of the psychology that goes on around investing. So that's why I think this is such an important topic.
Absolutely. We're doing a deep dive into our models right now, as we typically do every 3, 6, 9 months. We're always watching them, always tweaking them, especially when we're looking at this current environment, high interest rates, high inflation, rising interest rates, high inflation. And I don't think it's had been high interest rates in our entire career, Joe. I don't think. But, we're looking at these models, and you're talking 2 percentage points annual return difference between an array of models.
Yeah.
But how you get from point A to point B, and all of them are very different. The ride is very different. But people don't like to stick with the ride.
Right.
They want to start tinkering with it.
Yeah.
And so my question, talk to me about the psychology of choice. What goes into our financial decisions?
Yeah, and I think the benefit of behavioral finance or the psychology of making decisions, where I think it's such a great part of our industry, and I think we should do more with teaching investors about the risks behind our decisions, is because it really touches all aspects of our lives. So when we talk about making financial decisions, it's almost making any decision. And it goes all the way back for most of us. This goes all the way back to when we were a child. That's when the seed was planted. And that seed, when that seed is planted, and we'll just use obviously finance as the example right now. If when we were young, and you actually made a good point just a minute ago where you said we really haven't experienced high interest rates, but you know what, our parents did. And when you were young, if they were telling you all about high interest rates, and I could get a CD at 13%, and I could do this with a government bond. Well, now over the first couple of years of your childhood, maybe 7 to 10 years old, that's what you're starting to confirm. You're starting to take that belief that your dad told you about a 13% CD, and you're looking for confirmation of that belief. And then the more you find it, the more it becomes your perspective. So now your perspective, you can say, well, I could go out to a bank and I could find a really good, honest return for my investment. Now, if that goes on for another couple of years, now all of a sudden that perspective becomes your belief. And once it's your belief, every choice is going to start with that belief. So when you ask the question, how do we make financial decisions? It goes all the way back to when we were children and lines up with our belief system.
I remember my dad always talking about paying your house off early.
Yep.
Paying your house off early, paying you. And as I grew in the industry, I realized why. I started studying history, and I remember asking Dad, why did you preached pay your house off, paid it off, paid the house I grew up, off in 9 years or something like that. Yeah. He's like, son, it was 11% interest rate. Heck yeah, I paid it off as fast as I could.
Yeah.
And it does, Joe, and I wrote a book on this topic, that failures and successes and how in families we pass down these perspectives, which become our beliefs that can be generations old. I find it interesting that we know the old saying, from short sleeves to shirt sleeves to short sleeves in 3 generations. Well, there are sayings like that all over the world. I think Japan's is something like from rice paddies to the city to rice paddies in 3 generations. And it goes around the world because we pass down our financial behaviors, but as you said, our decision making in all areas in our life, we pass that down from parent to child and so forth for generations to come. And so how does the typical person then feel, and I stress feel, about losses versus gains?
Yeah, losses have a significantly higher impact than gains. And most research shows it's about 2 to 1. So to give a real life example to that, if let's say 8% in an investment would make us really, really happy. So if we got 8%, we would be very, very happy. What that would mean, if you would think, just simple math would tell you that minus 8% would make you really, really unhappy. And that's not an accurate statement. So in a typical research project, what you'll find is 8% will make you happy, minus 4 will make you really, really unhappy. And the issue is in the marketplace is it's very hard to find risk reward that fits that parameter. So the 2 times impact on losses sometimes makes it very difficult to build a portfolio.
It does. And when you do find that parameter, when you find let's just use your example, and for our purposes, this is purely an example, but a risk range of a -4 to loss to a positive 8% gain, that range right there, that it's not going to behave like the market. And yet, if you're seeing the market on the TV every day, you're expecting this market-like behavior, then you're going to get 100% upside, 100% downside. But if you start, as we're saying, let's say you're grabbing a 70% on up and the 30% on the down, and you're not going to behave pretty much ever like the market. What kind of problems does that cause for the typical investor?
Yeah, I think our expectations aren't met. So, and when your expectations aren't met, we're always trying to find things that we would dub as pleasure or we would label as pleasure and trying to avoid pain. And if those returns are not causing us happiness or not leading us to happiness, then our expectations might be irrational. And that sometimes causes an issue with what you're trying to accomplish and those goals and your ability to get there. So you just don't meet the expectations of the client.
Isn't that what that fits the old quote by Ed Dakota where he said, everybody gets what they want out of the market? Where if you're looking for pleasure, you're looking for pain, you're looking for validation of your perspective, or you're looking to gamble, you're going to find all of those opportunities in the markets. Whereas if somebody has a solid financial plan and they're looking for certain risk reward parameters that would cause that plan to be successful, as long as that makes sense, as long as it makes logical sense and the data supports it, you can accomplish that, right?
Correct. Yeah, I think that's why I say this a lot anytime I'm speaking of this topic. I think the worst thing that happened in the financial industry is having access to your account every day. And if you only got your statement every quarter, this short-term volatility would not impact your behavior. But now that you can forget every hour, you could look every second if you wanted to and have real-time data.
I mean, gosh, I'd love to find this article. I remember reading an article years ago, and I've never been able to find it, but where they did a study in the 90s when people got quarterly statements, and I think they only got their 401k statements annually, and how much higher the returns were then than now due to that.
Yeah.
So we're talking about biases. We're talking about fears. Let's get a little academic. Let's define some of them, because I think that'll help us understand what we're talking about. What do you think the most prevalent fears and biases are, and why?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, but I would say, the one that is probably most prevalent, in my opinion, is confirmation bias, and that kind of goes back to that whole belief system that I talked about earlier. When we believe in something, so if we believe in a certain stock or a certain investment or ETF, or it doesn't really matter the structure, we go out and we find the evidence that we need to support that belief. And I'm not saying that's the wrong thing to do, but if you only rely on confirming data that you're looking at because of your belief, you could end up going down the wrong path a bunch of times.
Absolutely. So how does that lead us down the wrong path? I think I don't want to apply just assume everybody has common sense with this, because I really want them to see what this is, because this happens all the time. Give me an example.
Yeah, and I sometimes I think the better examples when we're talking about this is not to use financial examples.
Agreed.
And this is even one that I haven't really looked into or done much research, so I'm kind of throwing it out there. But I think whoever's viewing this interview, I think what they would find is they would find data and research on this topic. So I would make the comment that, and I don't believe in this comment, by the way, so I'm just making it to prove a point, but you could say something as crazy as cancer isn't real. Right. And if you went out and did a simple Google search on that, my guess is you're going to find pages and pages and pages supporting that ridiculous statement. And that's very dramatic, but it's a good example of you could probably find data and research that supports any of your beliefs, whether they're good beliefs, solid beliefs, or don't really warrant much research to look into.
Well, isn't this what people do when they're always watching their favorite news station? We have all these 24-hour news channels. Pick your favorite flavor. And do you know anybody that watches them all? Like, really watches them all?
No, and that's a great example too. I stopped watching financial news years ago because, listen, we're all subject to biases and heuristics, and it impacts us all. No matter how much you know about it, it doesn't matter. It's still going to impact some of your decisions. And I saw that it was impacting some of the decisions that I was making financially and in the investment world. And I haven't watched a financial news show in years. There's other ways to get good financial information without having to hear others' opinions.
I find that interesting, Joe. Guys that are our age, that because you remember the old stockbroker days. I remember TVs being in every of the big shot stockbroker's office where I did my internship, in the mid '90s. And I don't listen to the financial news shows either. I don't watch them. And I stopped in '08. I can remember very vividly why I stopped during the '08 market and the '08 presidential election, which we thought was contentious. If you remember, we thought that was a bad election. I think we'd all appreciate having one like that back. But the amount of stress that it put on me and bad information, it was affecting decision making. I was making mistakes. I was not going to sleep anyway during that summer, but it was making it worse. We just finally turned it off, and I've never really turned it back on. And goodness, I mean, I'm like you. I know you read a lot. I read a lot, so we do get our news in other places. So confirmation bias, I call that proof texting, and I find it like this: I've seen this, where somebody gets an idea and they'll go find a Bible verse that supports an idea that they already have. Hence here's God's word saying and supporting my preconceived idea. And this is the thing about it, is just because you find a little bit of data that supports a preconceived idea, that does not mean that you're right. And it can lead you down a very dangerous path to be wrong, like bad wrong. I think you and I find out all the time. So what are some of the best ways to avoid? So actually, give us a couple of more. So we got confirmation bias. What are a few more that we can think about for just a minute?
Yeah, one that you see, and this is a little bit more prevalent in the younger generations, but you do see it quite a bit now, especially in making decisions, is overconfidence. That's another one that we tend, and I think because of our ability to data, our ability to research, if you were going into a discussion about any topic that you wanted to, you probably could just look at Wikipedia and you could sound really, really smart about that topic pretty quickly. So, overconfidence, I would say, is another one.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're not supposed to go read Wikipedia and sound smart?
Well, you could.
But I did before we got on this. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
No, but you're right. I mean, we always accuse the younger generation, but isn't every generation? Isn't that the kind of that's always a fallacy among the youth, right? That we think we know things, and when you take a step back, I think this is good for all of us, whether we're 20 or whether we're 60. We don't know everything there is to know.
Right.
We've lived a little bit of life the older we get, but gosh, what you should be learning is there's a lot you don't know. In fact, I remember when I did that internship, that was a Dean Witter, back when I was in college, and the stockbroker told me, he said, "Kid, don't get in this business till you're about 27, 28 years old." And I remember thinking at 20, that would be because I was so smart at 27 or 28 years old. Well, by the time I hit 27 or 28 years old, I'd started to realize there was a few things I did not know, right? That there was a lot more about money and finance and life in general than it's kind of amazing how dumb I'd gotten in that 7 or 8 years. And so, what can we do? How can we best avoid some of these biases that we run into, whether it's overconfidence, confirmation? I like the endowment effect.
Yep.
That falls into that fear of regret, where we have to admit we made the wrong decision and correct that decision. And Joe, in that one, I got news for the listeners. You're gonna make a lot of bad financial decisions. It's okay. That's why we manage risk, so that you can correct course and keep going towards your destination, which is your goals. But what can we do to avoid this?
Yeah, and I don't think you could avoid it. I think it's no different than a lot of things in the investment world. I think you can manage it. Daniel Kahneman, who some people watching this may not know, but he's won a Nobel Prize about behavioral economics, and he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. Also, well, he wrote more than one book, but that was one that was very, very well known, talking about system one and system two in your brain. And really, it's just one's an emotional thought process, and the other one's a little bit more intellectual. And he'd be the first one to say that he knows more about heuristics and biases than probably anyone in the world, but he still suffers from biases and heuristics. So it's, I don't think you can avoid it, but it's just understanding that those exist. And not only do they not exist for you, but they exist for the people that you are doing business with. So if you are buying a home, that real estate agent is very biased. If you are dealing with an insurance person, that insurance person is very biased. And it doesn't mean you don't do business with them. You just need to understand that they're going to like that one neighborhood more than the other one because that's where their listings are. So there's just certain biases that you just need to be aware of. And I think you'll make better decisions just simply by understanding what they mean.
Isn't that the real design of conflicts of interest being disclosed in our industry?
It's one of them. It is certainly one of them because, I don't know how any human around would be able to make the right decisions if they had the weight of 7 or 8 different conflicts on their back. But at the same time, you also need to survive. And you need to be successful in your career. So the less the conflict, the better the advice. And that is certainly because of the biases attached to that.
I agree 100%. And what I meant by this, and I think this is good in making all of our financial decisions. I was talking with one of our counterparties just on a deal that we're doing earlier today, and just asked, how do you get paid?
Yeah.
And just understanding they get paid, right? They're not working for free. They're not going to do this deal with Sound Financial for free. How do you get paid? I just wanted to know how you got paid. That way I would know where. You and I have had conversations like this, gosh, Joe, a bunch of times. Just let me know how you get paid. That way, this is why I'd say to the listener, this is why you ask your financial advisor about fees.
Agreed.
All of the fees. Our industry is notorious for hiding fees. Ask your advisor, show me all the fees. And are your wallets on the same side of the table?
Yeah.
And those are good things. Okay. So one of the things we can't eliminate biases. We can't avoid all of them. We can manage them. He made a statement one time that goes something like this: you can't eliminate biases, but you can avoid them and be open-minded. Explain what you mean by that, especially the open-minded piece. I like to be very open-minded. I like to learn, but how do you not be so open-minded that your brains fall out, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to some of the comments that we've made already. I think everyone needs to understand that their belief and their values are strong and it's ingrained in yourself. And it was, that seed was planted, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So those are strong beliefs. But understand that, and this is kind of another bias, it's status quo bias, but things change. Technology changes. Our understanding and our knowledge changes. I just read a stat just yesterday, and one of my family members, unfortunately, went through some serious health issues, and I was reading a research paper about this. It had to do with health, and it was research conducted in 2017 by Harvard. And what it said was, and this is the half-life of the knowledge that you learn in medical school. And what it stated was that about 18 to 24 months is the half-life of all the knowledge that you learned in medical school. So what that says is, a doctor, about half of what they learned really doesn't apply anymore in about 2 years. What is even scarier is they said by 2023, they think that time frame is going to be 73 days. So within about 3 months of you leaving medical school, half that knowledge is useless. And so I think you need to be open-minded, is that things change, and they change a lot quicker than they used to. And that's Moore's law that you could anybody could look up, but things are changing at a rapid pace. And so that belief system is not wrong. And I don't think anyone should think the beliefs that they've believed for the last 50 years are wrong. But there may be other ways. There may be other ways to achieve that goal. And being open-minded, I think, will benefit you in the long run.
And I think that this goes to, I remember being taught years ago by a mentor, a good friend of mine, that you should have very few principles in life, because principles are those values that you're willing to die over, right? My love of Christ, my love of my family, right? But there's very few others, and everything else can change. The facts change. I'll change my mind, And we see that, you and I see that in the financial world all the time, just in our career, the way I think arguably the fundamentals of technology, the technicals haven't necessarily changed, but technology has changed the application of those by speed that is growing exponentially, that we've had to change how we make decisions.
Yeah.
So that we can keep up with the speed. So you have this great story about a Navy admiral, and I want to start to wrap up with this, but I want us to unpack it. First, tell the story. How does that story go?
Yeah, absolutely. I had the opportunity about 2 years ago now to sit down with a retired admiral of the U.S. Navy. Had spent 45 years within the Navy and went up the ranks. From a midshipman all the way up to being a rear admiral and then an admiral, and when you get an opportunity like that, the first thing I think about is what did they learn from that experience? And that's an amazing experience. You traveled the world, had all different types of responsibilities, and I asked them. I said, of your 40 plus years in the military, what is the one thing that you learned that you would say was the most important? And I don't know if he could have answered any quicker. In a split second, he looked at me eyes to eyes and said, "It's the ability to make a decision and live with it." And I thought that was so powerful, because doesn't that sound really simple? And yet here, this gentleman who had experienced a lot, and wars and battles and being under pressure. And what the number one thing that he learned was the ability to make a decision and live with it. And I thought that was really powerful.
And Joe, when we read, and my grandfather retired a general, and he used to say, he would answer just as quickly, and this was his order of decision making: you take care of your mission, your men, your equipment, and yourself. And I think that the military gave them a decision making system. Those men were not born with that leadership ability. They were not born with that decision-making ability, but they had been trained and in a decision-making system that was deeply ingrained. Yeah. So he had a process to boom, 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 this rules-based process of making decisions and sticking with it, because that decision-making process had been tested over time. And I think that's one of the most valuable things that we can learn. We talk about this all the time on the show. In financial planning, have a solid financial plan that is leading you towards your goals. And then a rules-based investment system, but then insurance can fit into there, estate planning can fit in there, tax management can fit in there. All of this fits, but it's leading you to your goals. It's not having a rules-based system for the sake of having a rules-based system. Who cares if you have one of those? But if it's leading you to your goals, now it's valuable. So this is just part one of our two-part series. But Joe, I did not we'll throw a curveball question here. So what are you studying, you learning? What is exciting you about this year?
Yeah, I think quite a bit. I think there are some great opportunities, and this goes beyond investing, but they would be great opportunities with investing as well. in new technology. I think, we're starting to see that exponential growth, as we talked about a couple of times, in certain areas that, some people will call them disruptive technology, but whether it's, genetics and AI and blockchain technology. And I think this reminds me of 1996, 1997, when all of a sudden this thing was coming out people didn't know about, but it was the internet, and they were arguing about who invented it, and then there was this thing called email, and this reminds me a lot of that part of our lives, and if you don't remember it, that changed the world, and I
Yes.
think some of this new technology is really exciting, and I think we're going to start seeing it this year, and we have already. Look, just the best way to look at it is look at the Super Bowl ads this year. They
Yes. The whole
were
thing.
the whole thing was electric cars,
Yes.
blockchain technology. It's the wave of this new exponential disruptive technology.
And I think that's very exciting. I agree with you. There's a lot of things that I'm reading as well when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to the financial space, but in other areas of the world where new technologies are now starting to change the insides of industries, whereas at first technologies changed the outside of the industry.
Yeah.
So it's not as easily seen, but wow, when you get down into it, you go, oh my goodness. I mean, your stat, and I've read that same statistic here very recently about the half-life of what new doctors are learning in med school. And so that's another topic for another day. So my friend,
Sure.
we're going to do another one of these right very soon. Going to tackle noise.
I would love to. Thank you for having me.
Man, I appreciate you being on. Take care, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Welcome back. I'm glad you stuck around. Thank you. I hope you got a lot out of that. I think that there's a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety going on in our world, period, today. I mean, gosh, we just had a seriously life-changing, disruptive 2 years. I know when the quarantine started 2 years ago, I remember talking to my daughters and saying, this is going to be one of those events in your generation's lifetime where you're going to say, remember when. We all have them, and you only hope that you have 2 or 3 in your lifetime that you say, remember when. I was here when this happened. And even right now, you're thinking of things that have happened. But this last one has lasted so long that it's fed a lot of our fears. It's fed a lot of our anxieties, and it's heightened a lot of our biases. And the purpose of our show is for you to be a better manager of God's blessings to you. You're blessed tremendously, and even how you're wired. So Joe mentioned Daniel Kahneman's System 1, System 2 thinking. System 1 thinking is that fight or flight response. It's that fast thinking where you have to make quick decisions. And typically they're emotional decisions because that emotion and that adrenaline feeds that decision. But when you apply that to your financial decisions, they can typically be terrible and to be wrong, because that system 2 thinking is what we want for financial decisions, where that is the logical, the methodical, the data-based decisions where you have to think through them. For example, if I said 2 plus 2 equals, well, 4 has already popped into your mind. And that's because your system 1 thinking took over. It's readily available information. You learned that as a child, and it's very easy to remember. You can do it fast. But if I said 4,952 times 3,747, you can't do that quite off the top of your head. If you can, give me a call, because that'd be really cool to talk to you. But when we start talking more and more about these, it's even interesting that at the recording of this show, the one country has invaded another country, and quite frankly, we're not even supposed to talk about it on certain internet shows. How odd that is, because these are scary topics. Wars are. They feed our fears, and they feed this. They feed the human tendency towards misinformation. And I certainly worry about the people living in Eastern Europe. My prayers are for them. because that's a serious conflict, okay? But there's been saber rattling and shots fired and jockeying for position taking place since 2014. This is not a new idea of what's going on in Eastern Europe. And again, I'm not making light of it, but I'd ask even the investing public, why does this make you so fearful within your investments? Do you have a portfolio that's been tested and prepared over a long period of time and over a long period of data? Well, other wars get clumped up into that data. Other geopolitical events get pulled into that data. And so testing doesn't solve everything, but that research sure does help apply logical responses to our decision-making processes, not fears and emotions. We certainly, or I'd say why. That's kind of the question that comes to mind. Why do we draw so many fears from politics or regret or that fear of missing out? I do it. I'm certainly guilty of it. Everybody else is too. As Joe said about Daniel Kahneman, he says, gosh, I've studied it for decades. He's really known as the best in the business at it, and he's still susceptible to it. And so this is where I turn to. Psalm 34:4 says this: I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Let the entirety of that verse sink in. King David is the author, and did he have fears and biases? Oh my goodness, absolutely he did. He was human after all, but he dealt with wars face to face. He dealt with palace intrigue, trying to assassinate him. He had a kingdom to grow and to manage. He had a colossally dysfunctional family, and he was surrounded by warriors and by spies. And many of his problems he caused, especially the dysfunctional family part. Goodness gracious, he was all about that, right? And he wrote, I sought the Lord. So the first thing coming from this verse, to face your fears and financial biases, go to God. Simply go to God and say, help me. God, help me. I'm just human. I'm afraid. I see this going on in the world, and it makes me afraid. And when it comes to my money, I'm afraid of not being provided for. I'm afraid of not surviving, or I'm afraid of not measuring up. I'm afraid of mishandling what you've blessed me with. And I think that if you take a step back, you probably would hear God say, I've already blessed you with it. Because the next part of the verse says, and God answered him. And even before I'd say that, you take a step back and listen. Do you sometimes feel like when you pray, you're just talking to the ceiling? So by the way, everybody feels that way that's a praying person at some point in time or another. You just feel like you're talking to the ceiling. You feel like you're talking to yourself. But when you go to God and you just sit in peace and quiet and say, God, I trust you. Just help me to understand this, or help me to have peace. And God answered him. And I think he'd answer you and say, you were blessed tremendously. Why are you afraid? Why are you afraid? You have resources, you have opportunities, you have education. Apply those. Work with the advisors I've put in your life. Work with the people that I've put in your life that know what they're doing. Kind of like we're talking about your health, go to a good doctor that you trust, right? But you go to work as well and apply discipline and apply wisdom and let God take care of the uncontrollable areas in your life. And I realize there's a lot of uncontrollable areas in our life. And the last part of the verse says, and he delivered me from my fears. You see, God wants us to come to him. He wants us to trust him. Sometimes he leaves us desperate, especially in our fears, before he answers our prayers, so that we learn to trust him, so that we learn that we need him, so that we learn we're not in control, and that's okay because we are not God. What a comforting fact that is, that he's God, we're not, and that's all right with me. You know what? Go take a look at that whole chapter, Psalm 34. When you're praying, remember this, he made your ears. He certainly knows how to speak to them. because all while you're chasing something good, God's chasing you with something great. Take care. God bless.
For disclosure and citation information, please go to www.soundfsg.com/disclosures.